The entire restaurant seemed to stop breathing when the woman in the emerald green dress touched the empty chair and whispered, "Can I sit with you?" She had chosen the most dangerous table in the room without realizing it. The man seated across from her was Lucian Vescari, a name that made powerful men lower their voices and lock their doors. 3 armed bodyguards stood behind him, wealthy diners watched in disbelief, and somewhere outside, black cars waited with their engines running. Yet Ilara Winslow saw none of that. She only saw an empty chair, a lonely man, and the last safe place left in a room where her heart had just been shattered. Before we continue, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kind Ore if you believe kindness can appear in the darkest moments and that everyone deserves a second chance. And tell us where you are watching from tonight, because your city, your country, and your story may be more connected to Ilara's journey than you realize. Only 20 minutes earlier, Ilara had been sitting at a table near the windows, waiting for a man she had met online. She had spent 3 weeks convincing herself to attend the date. After years of cruel jokes, quiet rejection, and photographs taken from flattering angles because strangers treated her body like a public argument, she had almost cancelled. But that afternoon, she stood before her mirror, smoothed her green dress over her curves, and reminded herself that she was allowed to hope. She arrived early, ordered sparkling water, and placed a small wrapped book beside the empty plate because her date had mentioned loving old mysteries. When he finally entered, he looked at her, checked the photograph on his phone, and his smile disappeared. He did not sit down. He merely leaned close enough to say that she looked different in person and that he could not do this. Then he walked away while people at the surrounding tables pretended not to stare. Ilara remained seated until the humiliation became unbearable. The waiter approached with sympathy in his eyes, but she could not endure being pitied. She picked up the gift, rose too quickly, and searched for somewhere to hide until her trembling stopped. Every table was occupied except one chair across from Lucian. She noticed his expensive black suit and severe expression, but pain had made her reckless. She approached, gripped the chair, and asked the question that silenced the room. Lucian studied her tearful face. No one approached him without permission. Even restaurant owners waited to be summoned. His bodyguards shifted forward, but he lifted one finger, stopping them. Then he nodded toward the chair. Ilara sat before courage abandoned her. She placed the wrapped book on the table and apologized for disturbing his dinner. Lucian asked why she had chosen him. She glanced around at the frightened faces and admitted that he was the only person in the room who had not looked at her with pity. For reasons he could not explain, the answer struck him harder than a threat ever had. Lucian had spent his life being feared, obeyed, and secretly hated. He had forgotten what it felt like to be seen simply as a man sitting alone. When he asked who had made her cry, Ilara smiled sadly and said it did not matter. Lucian replied that people often said something did not matter when it had mattered far too much. She told him about the failed date without naming the man. She expected Lucian to offer empty reassurance, but he did not tell her she was beautiful as though beauty were medicine. Instead, he asked about the gift. Ilara unwrapped the mystery novel and explained that she worked in a neighborhood library that was about to close because its landlord planned to sell the building. She had spent months organizing fundraisers, but donations had slowed. The book had belonged to her late father, who taught her that stories could make lonely people feel less alone. She had planned to lend it to her date because she thought sharing something meaningful might help him understand her. Lucian listened in silence, disturbed by how naturally she trusted him with something fragile. Their unexpected dinner lasted nearly 2 hours. Ilara spoke about children who visited the library to escape noisy apartments, elderly residents who came because they had no one waiting at home, and exhausted workers who used the computers to apply for jobs. She never asked what Lucian did. She assumed he was a businessman with unusually intimidating friends. For the first time in years, Lucian did not feel required to perform power. He laughed once, quietly, when Ilara admitted that she judged people by whether they returned books on time. The sound startled his guards more than her approach had. But the evening changed when Ilara's rejected date returned. He had apparently learned from a waiter whose table she had joined. His face had gone pale, yet pride pushed him forward. He apologized to Lucian, not to Ilara, explaining that there had been a misunderstanding. Lucian's expression hardened. He asked the man why an apology meant for Ilara was being offered to him. The stranger stammered and finally turned toward her, but Ilara raised her hand. She did not want an apology born from fear. She wanted him to understand that leaving had not been the cruelest part. The cruelest part was making her feel that being seen beside her would diminish him. Lucian could have destroyed the man's life with a phone call. Everyone in the room sensed it. His old instincts urged him to do exactly that. But Ilara looked directly at him and quietly asked him not to. She said humiliation would not teach kindness, it would only teach fear. Those words unsettled Lucian because fear was the only language his world respected. Yet he let the man leave unharmed. In doing so, Lucian felt something inside him shift, as though Ilara had opened a window in a room he had kept locked for decades. The next morning, Ilara arrived at the library and discovered lawyers waiting at the entrance. She feared the eviction had come early. Instead, they informed her that the building had been purchased by a private foundation and transferred into a community trust. The library would remain open permanently. Repairs, new computers, and accessibility improvements had already been funded. There was no public donor name, only a short note stating that lonely people deserved safe places to sit. Ilara knew immediately who had done it. She confronted Lucian at his office that evening. For the first time, she saw the armed security, the bulletproof glass, and the men who addressed him with frightened respect. The truth became impossible to ignore. Lucian did not lie. He told her his family had built an empire through violence, corruption, and fear. He had inherited it young and convinced himself survival required becoming harder than everyone around him. Ilara felt betrayed, not because he was dangerous, but because she had begun believing the gentleness she saw at dinner might be his true self. Lucian told her it was true, perhaps the truest part of him, but one evening of kindness could not erase a lifetime of harm. Ilara left without promising to return. Weeks passed. Lucian continued funding the library but never contacted her. Instead, he began dismantling the most violent parts of his organization. He turned evidence over to authorities through attorneys, closed businesses built on exploitation, and used legitimate assets to compensate families hurt by his empire. His own associates called him weak. Rivals saw an opportunity. One rainy evening, his convoy was attacked outside the library after he attended a community meeting from a distance. Lucian was wounded while protecting a security guard who had once been ordered to protect him. Ilara found him sitting against the library's brick wall, blood darkening his shirt while sirens echoed closer. She knelt beside him, pressing her coat against the wound. Lucian told her to leave before danger returned. She refused. With tears in her eyes, she said he did not get to save everyone else and decide he was unworthy of being saved. In that moment, the feared man who had survived bullets, betrayals, and prison threats finally broke. He admitted he had changed because she sat across from him when everyone else was afraid to come near. Ilara corrected him. She said she had not changed him. She had merely shown him a door, and he had chosen to walk through it. Lucian survived. The transformation cost him nearly everything: his empire, his wealth, his reputation, and years of freedom while he answered for crimes he had allowed under his command. Ilara did not romanticize his past or excuse the people he had hurt. She visited when she could, brought him books, and reminded him that redemption was not the same as escaping consequences. It meant accepting them and still choosing to become better. 3 years later, Lucian left prison without bodyguards or black cars. Ilara was waiting outside in the same emerald green dress, altered slightly at the sleeves but still carrying the memory of the night they met. They returned to the restaurant together. The staff had changed, the tables had been rearranged, and no one fell silent when Lucian entered. He was no longer a man whose name controlled the room. He was simply a man carrying 2 library books and holding the hand of the woman who had once mistaken his table for a place of refuge. When they reached the chair where everything began, Lucian pulled it out for her. Ilara smiled and asked whether she could sit with him. This time, his answer came with tears in his eyes. He told her the seat had always been hers. If Ilara and Lucian's story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes people can change, and subscribe to Kind Aura. Your support helps stories of compassion, courage, and second chances reach people who may desperately need them. Special request, please comment, kindness opened the door, if you believe one compassionate moment can redirect an entire life, ***. Ilara had entered that restaurant believing she was the person no one wanted beside them. Lucian had entered believing fear was the only reason anyone stayed. But one empty chair brought together two wounded strangers, and each gave the other what they had been missing. She showed him that power without goodness was only another prison. He showed her that rejection could not determine her worth. Their love did not erase the past, but it gave them courage to face it honestly. Sometimes a life does not change because of a grand miracle. Sometimes it changes because someone looks at an empty chair, gathers the last of their courage, and softly asks, "Can I sit with you?"